Senator Cassidy.
Hey, sir.
How are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
I'm intrigued by your PhD thesis.
Yes, sir?
You know, I used to go to the beach in the Florida Panhandle when I was a kid, and there'd be tar balls. Now, I was told it was natural seepage that was releasing that, although it could have been a boat just being environmentally not good. But your research says that you can actually decide, looking at the microorganisms at the seafloor, as to whether or not it is seepage or whether it is hazardous discharge. Fair statement?
Yes, sir. I actually can see that from space, interestingly enough. We can document where seepage is occurring naturally and whether it's a short-term event or whether it's a continuous event.
So if we're to speak about, now we know that there's all kinds of seepage because I guess from Texas through Mobile, there's so much naturally occurring gas. But is there similarly, can you see from outer space, kind of marrying your two interests, I guess,
Yes, sir.
that there's seepage along that Florida Panhandle down the Atlantic, the Gulf Coast of Florida?
Yes, sir. In fact, pretty much anywhere in the world where we have a significant amount of sediments with organic material in it, you'll find some form of hydrocarbon seepage associated with
Now, I was once told that in South Louisiana, I believe this to be the case, we have a very high rate of relative sea level rise because we're taking out water, gas, and oil from beneath the ground, and so that support of that oil, gas, and water removed, the ground recedes. So a little bit of sea level, but a lot of subsidence. I say that to set up this next question. I was once told that the more you extract, the less seepage you will have because you're just decompressing the ground. Now, it might be there's so much under there in the Gulf of Mexico that you cannot decompress enough, but just your thoughts on that.
Yes, sir. And I'll just revert back to my days as an exploration geologist, that we're really looking for economic reserves, which means there has to be a fairly large concentration within a relatively small area. And those are the areas that you would be pulling the oil and gas out. Now, just about as fast as you pull it out in most of the reservoirs, you're filling it with water. So the hydrodynamics will remain about the same.
That's in the Gulf of Mexico, not on land.
It's in both, actually. Usually you're below the water table at the depths that you'd be producing oil and gas.
So then my understanding of South Louisiana, that our subsidence is related to extraction. What you're telling me is that unless it's a pretty high up aquifer, if it's oil and gas that's being filled with seawater that comes in?
Yeah, actually, I'm not trying to make it quite that restrictive, but what is happening in Louisiana is something that happens in many of the areas where you have a lot of immature clays, and the clays are very wet, and as the system subsides, what's really happening is as the clays compress, you're driving the water out, and that water then leaves, the volume drops. It can drop as much as somewhere between 20 and 40%, depending on the clay mineralogy that you're dealing with. And as such, things have to go down, and that's what's happening along the coastline in Louisiana.
So that leads me to my next. I think I know, I may overstate this a little bit. Grand Isle has subsided 9 feet in relative sea level rise, and that's a barrier island that protects us from storms. USGS will be involved with the dead zone, predicting the amount of fertilizer spilling into the Mississippi watershed. I gather y'all coordinate with NOAA, and then they predict how large that dead zone is. That's important because we would like to use some of that Mississippi River water in diversions, but I'm told the more nutrients, the more problematic, et cetera. You see where I'm going with that?
Yes, sir, absolutely. In fact, part of the question that you're bringing up is the interrelationship between all the systems, and that's really what we need to find out about how the ecosystems operate, and that would be that'd be one aspect of it in terms of how that dead zone is developed, how extensive it is, what are the driving factors. Being able to move the water around out of the Mississippi would be one of the solutions to the subsidence issue, and that we've basically kept it channeled either down through Morgan City, through the Chapel or down through the Mississippi Delta, and as a consequence, it hasn't moved around, and that's one of the issues that, of course, USGS is looking at in terms of subsidence and water levels, and particularly how it's impacted with major storms.
And I think what I've heard from you is that my understanding is that a lot of our subsidence is rather from the leveeing of the Mississippi River, where we no longer distribute sediment-rich river water to rebuild our coastline, as opposed to other factors. Is that, again, your understanding?
That's just a piece of it, sir. It's a very, as you might expect, and probably understand more than I in many ways, but it's a very complex relationship. And one of the things that the folks at the USGS that are focusing on that part of our nation will, of course, be the best to answer that question. The part I was referring to is really my experience and attempting to answer the specifics of the questions as much as I could. But, of course, to be able to fully answer what could we do in terms of the existing conditions and the impacts and mitigation, of course, that's one of the things I'd want to go talk to the folks that are the experts in it in the USGS.
Well, I look forward to
Come
having
back
that
to you.
conversation with you and they in the future. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
I
Look
yield
forward
back.
to it. Thank you, Senator.